The ice plains of Europa stretched endlessly beneath the pale, distant sun. The lonely outpost squatted on the surface like an afterthought, gray walls half buried in snow, antennae flickering against Jupiter's looming shadow. Inside, the hum of ancient tech buzzed beneath the boots of the last man anyone expected to be there. Hawkeye sipped lukewarm coffee from a dented tin mug, staring at a cracked monitor as lines of code scrolled by. He hadn't worn the uniform in years, but his instincts never retired. He could still tell when something wasn't right. And today, something definitely wasn't right. A red blip blinked on the corner screen. Distress beacon detected. Origin unknown. Coordinates. He already had his coat on before the computer finished the sentence. The snow kicked up in clouds behind the outpost's old skimmer as Hawkeye navigated the frozen ridges with steady hands. He'd learned to drive through war zones and alien deserts. Europa was just another flavor of silent chaos. Still, he wasn't expecting much. Space junk. A crashed probe. Maybe an unlucky scavenger. Not a story worth writing home about. But as the signal grew stronger, his eyes narrowed. The beacon's frequency wasn't human. It pulsed with a rhythm too clean, too organic. Then he saw it, a faint curved shadow against the ice. He killed the engine. The pod was half melted into the glacier, sleek and glassy, like a teardrop made of dark crystal. One panel had burst open from the inside, and steam hissed through the cracks. Hawkeye approached slowly, bow slung across his back. Old habits. Anyone alive in there? He called, voice low but steady. No answer. He edged closer and then saw her. Curled inside the shattered pod, barely conscious, was a figure wrapped in silver-gray fabric. Not quite human. Her skin had a faint blue sheen, and strange geometric tattoos glowed softly across her collarbone. Her breathing was ragged. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and wild. She flinched as he stepped near, baring small, sharp teeth. "Easy," Hawkeye said, raising both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her pupils contracted like a cat's. She trembled, whether from fear or the cold. He couldn't tell. Gently, he reached into his coat, pulled out a thermal blanket, and tossed it to her. She stared at it, then at him. Finally, she took it. He crouched beside the pod, scanning the damage. It looked like she'd ejected mid-atmosphere, emergency override, judging by the burn marks. The escape systems were fried, but the life support had just barely held. "You're lucky I picked this up," he muttered, though lucky might not be the right word. She made a low sound, half a whisper, half a growl. Then she collapsed forward. Hawkeye caught her before she hit the ground. She was burning up. "Great," he sighed. Injured, alien, and possibly radioactive. Still, he wrapped her in the blanket, lifted her gently into his arms, and turned back toward the skimmer. As he carried her through the swirling snow, the wind howled like wolves behind him. Hawkeye's outpost was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you aware of every small sound, the hum of the ventilation system, the creak of metal settling in the cold. He sat at a makeshift medical station. The alien girl, Trey, he'd learned her name, lying on the cot, still unconscious but breathing more steadily now. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. The alien girl's skin, pale but glowing faintly, was warming, her features softening from the initial shock of the crash. But there was something else, something in the way her body seemed to hum with energy, a quiet buzz beneath the surface, as if every cell was alive with something. More. Hawkeye paused, eyeing the strange patterns that flickered across her collarbone. At first, he'd thought they were tattoos, but they seemed to pulse, changing, as if alive. And the way her chest rose and fell, almost too fast, too shallow, it wasn't normal. He reached for the med scanner, intent on finding answers, but before he could activate it, she stirred. Teray's eyes snapped open, sharp and silver, like the reflectors of a hunting beast in the dark. She blinked, confused, then focused on him. seeming to see him for the first time. Hawkeye stepped back, giving her space, but she caught his gaze, her lips parting with a quiet gasp. Her breath quickened, and then she froze, staring at him like a predator locking onto its prey. Something shifted in the air between them. He could feel it, like an electric current. I'm not here to hurt you," Hawkeye said, lifting his hands. "You're safe. I'm just trying to." Her eyes darted to the door. A low, warning growl rumbled from her throat. "Teray," he said softly. "Hey, relax. You're okay." But she didn't hear him. Her breathing had quickened again, her nostrils flaring. She looked back at him, and for a moment, Hawkeye could have sworn there was recognition in her gaze. Not a friendly kind of recognition. The kind of look you get when you're caught in a corner. Then she reached out, grabbing the blanket wrapped around her, pulling it tighter. What is it?" Hawkeye asked, more to himself now, a twinge of unease creeping into his voice. The alien girl's body jerked, as though fighting against an invisible force. Her shoulders heaved with each breath, a faint tremor spreading down her arms. Hawkeye noticed her hands curling in, nails digging into the fabric as if she were trying to hold herself together. And then her pupils dilated, growing wide, the silvery gleam in her eyes intensifying. A low hum vibrated through the air, faint but noticeable. It wasn't from any machine in the room. It was coming from her. Teray's lips parted again, but this time, her voice wasn't a whisper. It was a soft, breathy growl. "Danger." "What do you mean, danger?" Hawkeye asked, his instincts now screaming. "Who's coming?" But Teray was no longer listening. She bolted off the cot with an alarming speed, her movements fluid and strange, as if the gravity of the room had no hold on her at all. She reached the door and slammed her hand against the panel. The door refused to open. Panic flickered in her eyes as she whirled back toward him, taking a step toward him, then another. She was breathing heavier now, her body taut with energy, the air around her shifting as though the room itself was pulling her in. "Stay back," Hawkeye warned, instinctively reaching for his bow. But she didn't seem to hear him. She was focused now, on him. And then, without warning, she lunged forward. The moment Teray lunged at him, Hawkeye didn't hesitate. He kicked back, his boots skidding across the cold metal floor of the outpost, and yanked his bow off his shoulder in one smooth motion. The girl was fast, too fast, but Hawkeye was faster. His fingers fumbled for an arrow, and the world seemed to slow down just enough for him to line up the shot. "Stay back," he barked, his voice sharp, commanding. He'd seen this kind of thing before, a frightened animal, cornered. The problem was, Teray wasn't just frightened. She was on edge, her movements sharp and jerky, like a predator ready to strike. Teray stopped just inches from him, chest heaving, her silvery eyes wild. She growled, the sound low and guttural, a warning from deep within her. Hawkeye held his ground, not entirely sure if she was about to rip his throat out, or if she was just trying to shake herself loose from some kind of alien panic. The arrow in his hand felt heavy, despite its light weight. It was no ordinary arrow. It was tipped with an EMP charge, designed to disable whatever tech was messing with her mind. The problem? He wasn't sure it would work on her. Then the door slid open with a sharp hiss. Hawkeye's eyes snapped to the entrance, and a chill ran down his spine. A sleek, black ship hovered outside, its outline sharp against the stormy sky, cutting through the harsh winds. The hunters had arrived. They didn't bother with subtlety. A half-dozen figures, all cloaked in heavy armor, stormed in like a well-oiled machine, weapons drawn and scanning the room. Their helmets were shaped like elongated skulls, terrifying to the untrained eye. One of them stepped forward, tall and broad, his voice smooth like oil. "Human, we've come for the girl." Hawkeye's pulse quickened. They weren't from the Galactic Council, that much was obvious, and the way they spoke made it clear they didn't care about diplomacy or even reason. "No deal," Hawkeye said, the edge in his voice thickening. He tightened his grip on the bow, narrowing his eyes. The leader of the hunters gave a short, sharp laugh, tilting his helmet in a way that suggested amusement. "You think you can stop us?" Hawkeye didn't answer. Instead, he notched an arrow. The EMP pulse inside hummed with deadly intent. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. They were part of a rogue group, known for tracking and capturing rare alien species, and they'd been hunting Teray for years, unaware that she'd been hiding among the stars. Teray was still frozen in place, her eyes flicking back and forth between Hawkeye and the approaching hunters. She seemed disoriented, unsure whether to flee or fight. "Leave." Hawkeye's voice was low but firm. He didn't need to say more. They could feel the weight of the warning in the air. The leader of the hunters took a step forward, and the tension in the room thickened. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm. Hawkeye's fingers flexed on the bowstring, ready for anything. The hunter spoke again, his tone dripping with disdain. "You think she's yours. You'll never protect her from us." Before Hawkeye could respond, one of the hunters lunged at him, a blur of movement and deadly speed. Hawkeye didn't hesitate. He let the EMP arrow fly, and in an instant, the hunter froze midair, his body locking in place as the charge shut down his armor systems. He crumpled to the floor in a heap, twitching weakly. But there were more. The leader snarled, drawing his own weapon, an energy blade that crackled with blue light. "You just signed your death warrant, human." Hawkeye's lips twisted into a wry grin. "I've signed a lot of those," he muttered, reaching for another arrow. He could feel the adrenaline flooding his system, his mind sharp and focused. They weren't walking away from this easily. Teray's voice broke through the chaos. "They will not take me." Her words rang with an intensity that made the hunters pause. Hawkeye's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, he saw something there, something more than fear. He saw resolve. She wasn't just another lost alien. She was a warrior. And in that moment, he knew this was about to get a whole lot messier. The moment the first hunter crumpled to the ground, the outpost exploded into chaos. Hawkeye's heart hammered in his chest as he released another EMP arrow, striking another attacker square in the chest. The man dropped like a ragdoll, his armor sparking and flickering out. But that wasn't enough. There were still 5 left. "Teray, move," Hawkeye shouted, scanning the room for the next threat. His bow was a blur of motion, pulling, aiming, firing, each shot deliberate and precise. He didn't have time to think. He didn't have time for mistakes. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and trapped. Teray, still unsure of what to do, stood frozen in the doorway. Her eyes flickered between the hunters and Hawkeye. But she didn't move. Hawkeye didn't have the luxury of waiting for her to make up her mind. "Teray, move your ass." He barked again, his voice sharp. The urgency in his tone finally broke through. She snapped her gaze to him. And then, with a fluidity that made him blink, she leaped into motion. The hunters saw her too late. With a fierce cry, she charged one of them, knocking him backward with an inhuman strength that sent him crashing into the wall. The impact left a dent in the metal, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire structure shuddered. Hawkeye didn't wait. He turned and sprinted toward the exit. He had already started the skimmer's engines remotely while the fight broke out. They had one shot at this, one chance to escape. His mind raced. They were on Europa, surrounded by ice and snow. Even if they got off the ground, they'd still have to outrun the hunter's ship. He wasn't sure if they could. The hunter's ship was faster, better armed, but they had one thing the hunters didn't: the element of surprise. "Teray, let's go," Hawkeye yelled, watching as she dispatched another hunter with a swift, brutal strike to his throat. Her movements were becoming more controlled now, more like a warrior than a scared girl. She didn't respond, but her eyes flicked to the doorway, calculating the risks, the angles. She wasn't used to fighting like this. She wasn't used to being hunted. Hawkeye didn't give her time to second-guess herself. The next hunter lunged at him, swinging a blade that crackled with electric energy. Hawkeye twisted, the blade missing by mere inches, and he kicked the hunter's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. He didn't stop to watch him fall. He was already moving toward the exit. They were almost there. He could see the skimmer through the thick glass of the outpost's doorway. It was small, nothing special, but it would get them out of here. The skimmer's engines roared to life, and the hatch began to slide open as the blizzard outside swirled around them, white and unforgiving. Hawkeye reached the door first, slamming it open and darting into the cockpit. Teray followed close behind, her breathing ragged but determined. As she slid into the seat next to him, she gave him one look, silent but understanding, and Hawkeye's heart skipped a beat. He didn't have time to analyze the feeling. "Hang on," he shouted, punching the throttle. The skimmer jolted forward, blasting through the icy wind as the door slammed shut behind them. The force of acceleration pressed him back into his seat, but he didn't have time to enjoy the ride. From the corner of his eye, he saw the hunter's ship lift off, a sleek black shadow against the swirling storm. It was faster, sleeker, but the skimmer was small, and he'd learned long ago that speed didn't always win the race. Sometimes it was about precision, about knowing your surroundings. Hawkeye angled the skimmer low to the ground, threading it between jagged ice cliffs and frozen ravines, weaving in and out of the snowstorms. The hunters would try to track them from above, but he had something they didn't: the skill of a man who'd lived through too many close calls to let fear dictate his moves. The first shot whizzed past him, a bolt of energy that sizzled through the air. He didn't flinch. He weaved, shifting the skimmer to the left and sending it spiraling downward through a canyon, narrowly avoiding a second shot. His hand was steady on the controls, his eyes locked ahead. Teray's voice broke the silence. "They're not giving up." Hawkeye's lips twisted into a wry grin, though his eyes were focused. "Neither am I." The skimmer jolted violently as another energy bolt struck the rear. The force of the impact sent Hawkeye's knuckles white as he gripped the control stick, teeth gritted. The hunters were relentless. Their ship was faster, and it was closing the gap with terrifying precision. "Hold on," Hawkeye shouted over the roar of the engines. The wind outside howled like a wild animal, but inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was tense, thick with the hum of the skimmer's systems fighting to stay ahead. He could feel the hunters gaining, their ship cutting through the blizzard like a knife through butter. Teray's eyes were wide, her face pale beneath the glow of the dashboard lights. Her hands gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles tight. She had been through battles before, fights that were savage and brutal. But this was different. This wasn't her fight. Not in this way. She wasn't used to running. But she wasn't panicking. Not yet. Hawkeye knew he couldn't keep this pace for long. The hunters had weapons designed to tear through the toughest armor. They'd picked the wrong person to chase. He'd survived worse. But this was different too. He had no idea what Teray was capable of, and no time to figure it out. "I need a plan," he muttered to himself, his eyes flicking back to the pursuit. His mind raced, calculating every move, every route, every possible outcome. They couldn't outrun them forever. A crackling static filled the cockpit, and a voice, cold and confident, came through the comms. "You can't escape, human. She belongs to us." Hawkeye's jaw tightened. He didn't know what they wanted with Teray, but it didn't matter. They weren't taking her. Not on his watch. The skimmer bucked again, sending them lurching to the left, but Hawkeye quickly corrected, his fingers dancing over the controls, weaving through the narrow passage between the ice cliffs. The hunters were trying to corner them, forcing them into a trap. The narrow ravine up ahead would be a perfect place for an ambush. He had to act fast. Teray shot him a look, a silent question in her gaze. She didn't need to ask. Hawkeye could read her mind. She knew what was coming. He threw the skimmer into a sharp dive, taking them down into the canyon with a dangerous twist of the throttle. The hunters followed, almost too easily, their ship swooping down after them. Hawkeye's plan was risky, but it was their only chance. The ravine walls shot up around them, tall and jagged. The skimmer's hull scraped against the ice as they threaded through the narrowest of openings, the hunter's ship right on their tail. The whine of its engines was deafening, but Hawkeye didn't flinch. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. He was in control. Then, in an instant, he hit the switch. The skimmer's cloaking device flickered to life, blending them with the blizzard. The hunter's ship passed through the ravine with no sign of hesitation, its sensors still searching for them. The silence that followed was deafening. Teray's breath was shallow, her chest rising and falling as she watched the hunters disappear into the whiteout. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Hawkeye didn't answer immediately. He was focused, watching the hunter's ship fade into the storm. For a moment, he thought they might have actually pulled it off. Then, a familiar beep sounded from the dashboard. A red warning flashed across the screen, multiple heat signatures detected. "Damn it," Hawkeye hissed, slamming his fist on the console. "They're using thermal imaging." Without wasting another second, he slammed the throttle forward, yanking the skimmer upward at a breakneck speed. The skimmer shot through the blizzard, the whiteout swirling around them, as the hunters locked onto their trail again. The next shot was too close, too close. It hit the wing, sending the skimmer careening sideways. Hawkeye gritted his teeth and wrenched the controls hard to the right, pulling the skimmer back into a tight spiral. Teray was yelling something, but he couldn't hear her over the roar of the engines and the crackle of static in his earpiece. The world outside was a blur of white, spinning with the force of the maneuvers. He had to get them to a safe zone. Somewhere they could regroup, plan. Somewhere he could make them regret chasing a human. The skimmer's engines screamed, a metallic wail cutting through the chaos as Hawkeye jerked the controls to the left. The hunter's ship was relentless, closing in fast with every twist and turn, their blinding red lasers tracing them through the storm. The cold outside felt like a tangible force, battering against the hull, but the real danger wasn't the weather. It was the merciless pursuit behind them. "Teray," Hawkeye shouted, his voice rising above the roar of the storm. She was gripping the seat next to him, her face pale but determined, eyes scanning the blizzard for any sign of their attackers. She wasn't used to this kind of chase, but there was a fire in her that made her more than just a passenger. He could feel it. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice strained but steady. "There's no plan," Hawkeye gritted out. "Not unless you have one." The hunter's ship was closing in, weaving through the ravines like a phantom. Too fast, too agile. Hawkeye cursed under his breath. They were running out of options, running out of time. They needed a way to shake them, and they needed it fast. He slammed the throttle forward, forcing the skimmer into a steep climb that sent them soaring upwards, breaking through the ice storms with a violent lurch. The skimmer shot toward the sky, the wind howling outside like a living thing, but they couldn't outrun their attackers in the open. Not for long. "Shit," Hawkeye muttered, scanning the horizon. It was a blinding sea of white. The hunters were on their tail, faster and deadlier than ever. Teray turned toward him, her eyes dark and focused. "We need to break the line of sight." Hawkeye's brow furrowed as he processed her words. Break the line of sight. It was risky, more than risky, but it was their best shot. Without a word, he pushed the skimmer into a wild dive, spiraling toward the ice-covered surface below. The wind howled louder as they plummeted, the skimmer's underbelly scraping against the frost-covered ground as they swooped lower and lower, cutting through the snow like a blade. The hunters followed, relentless, firing off energy blasts that missed by mere inches, sending up plumes of ice and snow that sprayed across the skimmer's cockpit. But Hawkeye wasn't slowing down. Not now. He spotted a ravine, narrow, deep, and lined with towering ice cliffs. A perfect trap. One wrong move, and they'd be pulverized by the walls. But he didn't have a choice. "Hold on tight," Hawkeye shouted, his hands tightening on the controls as he threw the skimmer into a steep bank, twisting it into the ravine. The hunters were too close, their ship flashing through the snow and ice as they followed like a shadow, trying to box them in. Teray's breath came in quick, shallow bursts, her knuckles white from gripping the edge of her seat. She didn't flinch, didn't scream. She was focused. She understood what was at stake. The walls of the ravine loomed closer, and Hawkeye's pulse quickened. The space was tight, too tight. The skimmer's engine screamed as they narrowly avoided a jagged ice pillar, the metallic frame of the ship screeching against the freezing air. The hunters were still right there, tailing them with cold, calculated precision. It wouldn't be long before they found the perfect shot. But Hawkeye had one last trick up his sleeve. He reached for the switch that activated the skimmer's cloaking system, something the hunters hadn't anticipated. The blue light of the skimmer flickered for just a second before they were gone, the ship blending perfectly with the swirling white chaos outside. The hunter's ship slammed into the ravine's wall as it tried to follow, the explosion sending a burst of snow into the air. Hawkeye could hear the distant sounds of their ship's systems failing, the screech of metal on metal. Teray's breath caught in her throat. Did we lose them? Hawkeye didn't answer. Instead, he banked hard to the right, guiding the skimmer out of the ravine and into the heart of the storm, where the hunter's ship had no chance of tracking them. The skimmer hummed with the power of its engines, moving swiftly through the frozen landscape, but the danger wasn't over. He had bought them time they desperately needed, but it wouldn't last forever. The hunters would come back, and they'd come harder. "We've got a little time," Hawkeye said, his voice low, eyes scanning the endless white horizon. But not much. Teray nodded, her face a mask of determination. She wasn't about to give up now. Not when they were so close. The blizzard howled around them, the world outside a swirling vortex of white and ice. The skimmer sliced through the storm like a knife through silk, the engine's low hum cutting through the howling winds. Inside, the cockpit was tense, the air thick with the smell of ozone and sweat. Hawkeye's hands were steady on the controls, but even he couldn't ignore the weight of what they'd just pulled off. The cloaking device had bought them some time, but it wouldn't be enough to escape entirely. The hunters weren't done. They were ruthless, and they had the resources to find them again. Hawkeye wasn't ready to bet their lives on the hope that the storm would hide them long enough. He needed a plan, a real one. He glanced over at Teray. She was quiet, her eyes scanning the storm through the narrow window beside her, as if she could see something he couldn't. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture told him she wasn't about to collapse under the pressure. There was a fire in her, something sharp and wild that reminded him of the old days, before everything had become a fight for survival, before he'd started questioning if anyone could be saved. "You're not the only one who can survive this," Teray said suddenly, her voice low but fierce. "I've been through worse." Hawkeye raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. She was right. Whatever had happened to her, whatever they had done to her, had made her tougher than he expected. But there was something else, something unspoken in the way she said it, something that made him wonder how deep her resolve really went. "I'm not worried about you," he muttered, not looking at her as he navigated the skimmer through the storm. "I'm worried about us." She didn't answer right away, but her lips twitched as if she was trying to keep a smile in check. "Us? I thought you were the one calling the shots here." Hawkeye shot her a quick glance. There was something strange in her tone, almost like a challenge, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Just keep your eyes open," he said, his voice a little sharper than he intended. Teray didn't press further. She just nodded, her gaze fixed on the storm again. The tension in the cockpit was thick, almost suffocating. They were running out of places to hide. The storm wasn't going to last forever, and neither was their luck. Hawkeye checked the readouts on the dashboard. The hunter's ship was still out there, Its heat signature had been flickering on his radar for the past 15 minutes. It wasn't exactly tracking them yet, but it was close. Too close for comfort. He didn't need to be a genius to figure out that the storm wouldn't stop them forever. They'd be back soon enough. "We need to get somewhere they can't follow," Hawkeye muttered, almost to himself. Teray turned her head, eyes narrowing. "Somewhere like what?" Hawkeye hesitated. He didn't know if he was ready to trust her with this yet. It wasn't just a safe house. It was a place he had kept secret, a place where he'd hidden after some of his worst missions. But it was close. Too close for comfort. "A hideout," he finally said. "A place out of sight. I've been there before. And it's deep enough that even they won't be able to track us." "Does it have cover?" Teray asked, leaning forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. "It has everything," he replied. "But it's a risk. Better than sitting here waiting to be shot at." Hawkeye shot her a glance, considering. She was right, of course. Staying out here in the storm was just buying them time. The hunters wouldn't give up. They never did. If they were going to survive, they needed to take the fight to them, and that meant getting to the hideout before the hunters did. The skimmer suddenly jolted, sending both of them lurching forward. The storm was intensifying, and the gusts were harder to fight against. The shaking only added to the tension in the cabin. Hawkeye's hands tightened around the controls, his mind running through the possibilities. He punched a few buttons on the dashboard. "Brace yourself. We're going in." Without another word, he pulled the skimmer into a dive, heading straight for a rocky ridge on the horizon. The ground was getting closer by the second, and the storm's fury was making it nearly impossible to see. But Hawkeye didn't flinch. He trusted the skimmer, and more importantly, he trusted his instincts. The ridge loomed ahead, sharp and unforgiving. Teray braced herself, eyes wide. "Are you sure about this?" Hawkeye didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the ridge, the narrow gap between the jagged cliffs. It was their only way in. As they entered the canyon, the storm's rage seemed to fade behind them. For a moment, it was just the quiet hum of the skimmer's engines and the pounding of Hawkeye's heart in his chest. But he wasn't sure how long they had before the hunters found them again. The skimmer's engines hummed with a steady pulse, the noise muffled now by the dense walls of rock around them. The storm above still raged, but down here, in the narrow canyon, it felt like they had found a small slice of silence. For a moment, everything seemed still, but Hawkeye knew better than to believe in peace when enemies were closing in. He glanced at Teray, who was watching the entrance of the canyon, her face a mix of determination and wariness. They had reached the hideout, a temporary refuge, but only for a short while. The hunters would find them eventually, and when they did, the real fight would begin. "We don't have long," Hawkeye said, breaking the silence. Teray didn't reply. She didn't need to. She understood. It was like they were on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the final drop. Hawkeye leaned back in his seat, pulling up the schematics of the canyon on his screen. His mind was racing, calculating angles, escape routes, anything to get them out of this alive. The hunters were relentless, but they were also predictable. They'd follow, they'd search, and then they'd strike. But Hawkeye was betting on one thing, their underestimation of him and Teray. "We'll have to use the terrain," he muttered to himself. "What do you mean?" Teray asked, her voice low but steady. "We'll lure them into the narrowest part of the canyon," Hawkeye explained. "It's their only way in, but it's also a death trap if they don't know how to navigate it. We'll set up the skimmer in a way that makes it look like we're trapped. Once they come in close, we take them out." Teray raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the plan. "You're playing it risky, but I like it." Hawkeye cracked a smile, but it didn't last long. The reality was simple. They didn't have a choice. Either they made their stand here, or they ran, something he didn't intend to do. "Get ready," Hawkeye said, standing up from the cockpit. "We'll need everything we've got. I'm setting the traps. You know what